Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. I am joined with someone on my team, Aaron Evans. First off, Aaron, welcome to the show. This is like, we talk about the podcast all the time, but this will be like your first time officially on it.
Yeah, first time. Long time coming. Excited.
Yeah. So the reason Aaron's joining is we've been spotlighting some of the Next Gen award winners from Ed Market, and we had two from our team. So we had Matt Rogers and Aaron Evans on our team. And we really want to make sure we're getting the perspective of people that are coming through that truly is like the next generation of our industry. So, Aaron, do you mind giving a little bit of your history of what you got here? But I'm going to have you start at the beginning as a student. What was school like for you?
Ooh, wow, that's a good question. School was fun. School was challenging. And the reason it was challenging, I was one of those original 1980s kids, Ritalin kids, as we're called. And I had ADHD, and that being new, relatively new, and growing up in the 90s, getting accommodations and getting teachers to understand what that meant and how to work with students who had different needs. It was not as inclusive an environment. And so there was a lot of advocating by my parents. I was very blessed to have them advocate so strongly for me. But it took through junior high and into high school until it really started working for me. Some of the kinds of helps and accommodations that made school fun.
So when you talk about kind of your parents being advocates, like what did they have to do? Was it more like you were getting in trouble and they were like whoa?
No, it wasn't so much a trouble thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I did some cheeky things, as I think most kids do, and throughout their school years. But no, it wasn't really that. It was more really basic things. I would need repeated review. So I might hear a lesson plan, but I would need it repeated and maybe repeated and given in a different way. I would need help with taking notes, because if I'm taking a note, I can't hear what's being said. So I would need some help with note taking, and then simple things like preferential seating. If you put me to the front of the class, you get a totally different outcome than if you put me at the back of the class. And so little things like that. I was blessed to have some teachers that were all in on that, and anything they could do to help, they were there. But I had some that were resistant to that. And that's where my parents advocating and trying to really help them understand and see what was helping and working and talk to other teachers really helped.
So if you were going to talk to yourself as a student, like a high school student, would your high school version of yourself be surprised that you're in the education industry now?
My high school self, yes. My high school self would have told you I would be in medicine right now. Education, no, not education. I come from a long line of educators. It was something that it's something that resonates deeply with me now. But as a high school student, no. And I think that's it's something that being in this industry and sitting on this side of the table. I think it's one of those things where kids grow up and you always have those common answers. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a lawyer, a doctor, a firefighter, a policeman. And no one sits there and says, I want to go and just spread the word on how important furniture, school furniture can be in an environment. No one thinks of these things, right? No one, especially in high school or even younger, thinks this. But then you find these passions and you find these alignments and you see things that you don't see 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So talk through post school. How did you get into this industry?
Post school, my first job out of school was overseas in Spain, and I did that for a year. And right before I left, I met a girl and I thought, man, that is the coolest girl I've ever met. I should marry her someday. And so I came back from Spain to see where that was going. And sure enough, we are now married and we have a child. And so that was a good decision to come back. And I just took the first job that I really could without really any direction. It was more like I came back to the United States. I had no money. I had no car. I had a girl I wanted to marry. So it was like, I just need something. And I did that for several years and it was going well. And a recruiter reached out to me out of the blue and told me about an opportunity. And I almost hung up on the recruiter. It sounded like a scam, what they were offering me. And so luckily I didn't. And I pursued that. And that's how I got into this industry. And over time, I started finding a lot of passion for what I get to do now.
Yeah. So what was that turning point for you? Because I know your passion behind it, of where kind of it became a job of like selling something to like, oh, what this does actually really has a big impact. What were the events or what were the things that happened for you that changed your perspective on it?
It was just listening to the conversation coming into an industry, or when you leave one job, it's in a different industry and you come into something new, you don't really quite know up from down. And there were a couple of people that I worked with in my first company on this, and when I joined this industry, and I heard the conversations that they were having, and the conversations had absolutely nothing to do with the product that was being sold or that they were responsible for selling. It had nothing to do with that. All of the conversations were around impact and how do we make change and how do we teach in a way that can reach more students and how can we consider more than just this type of student. And the more I dug in on that, the more I wanted information, and it started kind of lighting this fire, and it resonated with me as one of those students who would have loved to know that there was someone saying, wait a second, what about that kid over there that needs something different? Or can we just rethink this? And one of the most interesting things was, as I started digging and trying to learn more and educate myself about this and try to understand why this message seemed to be resonating with educators and superintendents and administrators, I was actually a little bit disheartened, because what I found was I would dig and I would dig and I would ask questions and I would ask questions, but a lot of times the results that I got back were, well, we make this claim because that's what our marketing department told us, right? And so there was a lack of research, there was a lack of data behind a lot of the claims that were being made. But that was based off of something. So that research and that data is out there, but that's what really started my drive to start digging in and saying, like, well, why? This is fascinating. I want to know more about this movement.
Yeah. So how long have you been in the industry now? Like if you look at total years?
Coming up, I'm going into my 10th year. So 9 years going into the 10th year.
So from what you've seen, how would you assess where we're at as an industry now?
As an industry, how would I assess where we're at as an industry? I think that where we were 10 years ago, it was new-ish. It wasn't new. There were people out there, but that's when I think things really started gaining traction. And you see how many people, manufacturers, dealers, architects, designers, how many more people either talk about or give value to thinking about space and the impact of space. It's not that those things weren't happening previously. Sure, they were. More people are understanding it. You're seeing more programs created to educate people, like Ed Market's Eclipse program. There's a whole module in A4LE's ALET program dedicated to this. And so you're seeing more of that become almost more like the common knowledge. So when I first started, the term, which I think is now, maybe it's outdated, maybe it's overused, but that term then was 21st century learning. There was no definition of what that is. Like, you can't just go Google. You can Google and get like the common themes of that, but there's no true definition. So there was a lot of um, people, school districts, a lot of people trying to figure that out internally and then going externally to different manufacturers, dealers, architects, saying, what is 21st century learning? What is it for us? Where were we in the 20th century? What is 21st century learning, and how do we get there? And there wasn't really a blueprint. And now it seems like it's much more understood by many more people.
Yeah. And you're involved with both of those associations a lot. A4LE, going through the ALEP program, very involved with Ed Market as well. I would totally agree with you. I feel like the last 10 years has been, it was from kind of more the edges. It would be like, like those were the trendsetters that were talking about and doing it. And now the research is following, and some of more of the practices and the philosophies are getting integrated all the way through to the teachers and to the students, where it's not as disconnected, but there's still holes in there. And we talk about it all the time. Like, what are the things that you're seeing, the holes of, like, man, if we all could just do this better?
Yeah.
Where are those areas where you think we should be focusing on?
Yeah, and you'll know this, that this is something I'm passionate about. Something where I see one of the biggest holes. And the way that I've come about trying to express this is that there seems to be three things, at least from our perspective. There's many more things that go into getting a building built or renovated or modernized. When you do this, you work with an architect. School district works with an architect and spends so much time figuring out, what does the community need? What does the staff need? What do the students need? How do we design this building? What are the adjacencies? And how do we solve daylighting and air quality? And they spend all this time going through this, and they get a fantastic building put together that hits all of the needs, the mission and the vision. That's great. That's one pillar. You've got to then furnish that building, not just with furniture, but the right technology. You've got to get all the stuff into the building, and all of that has got to be discussed and analyzed, and you've got to hear from different stakeholders. What do we need? What do the students need? Where are we going? What's our vision? And that has to align with the built environment. So you get all of that solved, and you get the building solved, and all you have done is created enormous potential. That there is this one other piece, and those are the occupiers of the building. That's the staff, teachers, the students. And that's the piece where I keep seeing, and I every time that I discuss this, whether it's with school district personnel, with the A&D community, it seems to be agreed upon that final hurdle is that change management piece. And the way that it really first got onto my radar when I got into this industry, I was working on a layout and I had a rendering done, and I'm looking at this, and I graduated from high school in 2003. I sat in a combo desk and we all faced the front. That was the learning environment. So pretty much like 75-80% of the United States still is that. And so I'm working on this layout, and I've got triangle desks and groups, and I've got tall desks and regular height desks, and I've got chairs that can rock and swivel and go up and down. And I'm looking at this thinking, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And my mother, who's a retired teacher, I showed it to her. I was really excited. I share it with her, and she looks at it and goes, no way. And I'm like, what do you mean no way? How could you possibly, look at how great this is? And that's when she explained to me, she goes, yeah, but I've shown up to teach one way for the last 20 years. You can't give me this and think I know what to do with this. That kid's back is to me. How am I supposed to teach if they're not even looking at me? And that was this shift where I realized you can build a fantastic building that totally meets all of the needs. You can furnish and put all the technology and the furniture and everything into the building and create all of this potential. But if you don't help the staff along to understand this massive shift, what can be a massive shift to the way that they've shown up to do their job for the last 5, 10, 30 years of their career, they're not just going to flip a switch and understand it. And it's not let me tell you about it this one time and then you'll just know it from now on. I mean, this is a change management piece. This is a professional development piece. This is your self-efficacy as an educator and being able to be malleable and flexible to understand a different and new way of doing that. And when you have human personalities, when not everyone's the same, getting buy-in and getting fidelity to what you're trying to do, that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge. And that's where I see the most struggle and the most opportunity to focus on.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different roles within that to actually drive that change. I know, I mean, you've been a big part of how we're defining our radically student-centered approach. What does that look like? Because every project's totally different, but in like the ideal scenario, how would you try to make sure that that's not happening? We always talk about like the last thing we want is we just drop off furniture and then be like, see ya and go figure it out. When you see it done well, and I know every project is totally different. What are the ones that are doing it well doing differently?
Yeah, well, they all are different, but I think that, and I'll say that a lot of this things that I was thinking about trying to figure out, and it was either at Ed Spaces or Learning Scapes last year. But I sat in a session that Aaron Buring from Lionacus was doing, and he took this to Santa Monica, worked with the district, and it was fantastic what they were able to accomplish. What they did is they created, and I'm going to butcher this, so if Aaron watches this, I am so sorry if I get all of this wrong. But they created a baseline, and I think that's really important. Where are you currently? What are you comfortable with? And what changes, if we made them, would help you reach more students, empower you as an educator? Like, what do you think the outcome would be? Like, how do we make this better? What's the current state? Let's get a baseline. Where are we trying to get to? And if we make XYZ changes to get there, what do we think the outcome will be? What was fascinating is then they went, so that was they went post, and they went and said, okay, so we made all of these changes. Some time has passed, a year or so. How's it going? And they captured data there. So they didn't just build the building. They didn't just furnish the building and then everyone went away. They got a baseline. They had some goals. They worked a process. And in the end, they went back and reviewed against that. And what they found was actually kind of disturbing to them, because at first the post results were indicating there must have been a massive flaw in what they were thinking was going to make an impact, because it wasn't having the results that they were hoping for. So they're worried. Oh my gosh, what is going on here? They dig in deeper into their results, and what they found were that the teachers that were utilizing the space and the furnishings the way that was intended and the way that was agreed to that would lead to change were reporting the results that were expected. They were ecstatic about the space. They're moving things around all the time. They're noticing a difference in the students. I mean, they are, all of the things that they were hoping for, they're seeing, which is great. There was a subset of staff that wasn't doing anything. All they had was the potential that was created, but they didn't act on that potential. And they were the ones that were upset about the furniture. They were upset because it wasn't making any of the impact that was promised to them. But at the same time, here was their own piece of not utilizing that potential to make the impact and reach that impact. And so I think that creating the baseline, creating the goals, working the process, and then capturing results on the back end to understand what can we learn from this? maybe they weren't the results. How do we get better next time? You got to go through that over and over to see, if we do this, can we make it better? Can we make it better? Can we get better? Can we get better? And if you have that approach, if you keep asking, can we get better? Can we consistently make an impact? What does an impact look like for us? At least you have something other than the furniture's here, the building is
Yeah.
open.
And it takes school leadership to be able to take on something like that, to be able to do that. So that's the piece, like that change management and that piece that is so important to do that. Otherwise, like nobody's going to decide they're going to drive that type of change unless it's coming from the leadership in a coordinated way to do that.
Yeah, Kevin, you're right, and this is the point where, on the one hand, we don't want to get over our skis. If we're not educators, we want to say, okay, well, we understand we play a piece in this, and you have a whole thing that we're not walking in your shoes every day. Once you hand these things over, that's when this really becomes a human resources type of thing. This is managing your staff, managing your employees, and developing them. If you're trying to get to a place and you have some people that can't get there, that's how you've got to bring them along. And that does take strong leadership. And it takes strong leads in departments that report to strong principals, that report to strong administrators, that report to a strong superintendent. I know it's something you're passionate about and you've brought a lot of light to, but I think and correct me here, average tenure of a superintendent right now is 2.8 years.
2.9 years.
2.9 years. There's a lot of turnover in general. And especially coming out of COVID, we lose a lot of great teachers, a lot of great administrators. We've got turnover at superintendent levels. You've got to have stability and strong leadership, because that's going to cascade all the way down through an organization. And a school district is an organization. And if you have strong leadership to guide that, that's how you're going to see results.
Yeah, and I think we're at a really interesting time. I feel like we're at an inflection point on education right now. There's just a lot of things coming out of COVID, a lot of like there's just a lot of things that are shifting kind of the traditional of what we thought school was for the last 50 years or so. What are the things that you're seeing that are giving you like optimism, or things that you're excited about that we're working on, like things, whether it's, like you personally doing that, or you're seeing like the industry is moving this way? What are those things that give you those moments of you're like, all right, we're on the right track?
Yeah. I think seeing what's happened in the last 10 years, where this has now become the mainstream, and it means that any opportunity moving forward, this will be part of the conversation. It may not be what someone buys into, and that's fine. If for a community or a district, or someone says, we're not going to go this way, we might go this way, that way, this way, that's fine. But at least it's part of the conversation. So I think having the right conversations is really encouraging. What I think and I hope are the right conversations to understand and shift away from the education system kind of as it was built out in the 1890s, and hey, let's rethink space, let's rethink the way these things are done. But being on a track, that is the part where I feel like I am so far in left field. And you mentioned COVID. This is, I think, what we started seeing when I got into the industry and got exposed to this thing was relatively new. But we started seeing and hearing a lot about project-based learning, and a lot of hearing the words sage on a stage, and in a negative connotation of get away from sage on a stage. There's no front of a classroom anymore. And we want teacher facilitators that are facilitating student-driven learning. And you couple that with the increase in technology, where, I mean, everything is being run on a Chromebook or an iPad. you take all of that together and you throw COVID in, which then expedited a drastic change in how we're doing content delivery. And you look at what's coming around the bend, and that's the part where it's both encouraging, but also um, there's so many questions that I think people have as far as which way is education going. We are already seeing things like Sal Khan and the Khan Academy come out with Khanmigo, where we have AI tutors that can even help educators. They can help lesson planning. And let me tell you, that was the bane of my mother's existence. And I'm sorry if she ever watches this, but that was a thing that took up so much of her capacity, lesson planning all of the time and grading all of the time. Um, and we look at the way that that's shifting, and we already started that 10, 15 years ago saying we want educators to be facilitators. We want students to drive their learning. We want to give them the tools to be able to do this. And you start layering that with some of the technologies that they have currently and that are coming out. And you start asking the question, if historically the role of the teacher was, I have content in my head, or I have access to content that I have to then give to you. I've got to get something out of my head and into your head. When the content is not necessarily in the head anymore, and they're facilitating you finding the content, what is that role of the educator? What happens to class size? What happens to building utilization? What happens when we have a lot of buildings that aren't being used the way they were formerly? And instead of building another $80 million building, we repurpose a building instead. And what happens to when it's not, maybe it's not 22-1, maybe it's 50-1 because some of the kids are remote. What does that look like? I think there's so many questions that are encouraging that I think just within the last 3 years have been brought to the forefront, that we're always kind of bubbling there. We're already going in that direction, but now we're there. And now we're like, we are literally, we are in 1993 right now when it comes to this. We're in 1993. And Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell has a giant gray phone. That is where we're at. We're at the very beginning of this. And you look within 15 years, we had apps on our phone. We had iPhones. We had a couple of years after that, we had FaceTime. Now, like the idea in 1993 that you could call someone internationally and not even, you could call someone in another state and not pay long distance rates, let alone video call someone in another country for free. It didn't even make sense. You couldn't even think about what that would look like. And I feel like that's where we're at.
So I also want to get your perspective coming in as a newer parent of looking at it from the parent perspective. What are you looking for? Like if you were looking to find the best schooling educational experience for your daughter, what are the things that you're looking at?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that is a conversation, in our households. What does that look like? And where do we find that? Because we believe in the public education system. But I think it's, you have knowledge that has to be learned, and access to knowledge is more equitable than it ever has been. It's only going to keep getting better. So having a structure and an ability to access knowledge is not the concern. I think, to me, it's more about, if I'm going to send my daughter somewhere for 8 hours a day, how is she developing as a person? What are the things that she's developing? What are like the character development of my daughter is important to me. I have no doubt that she'll have access to really great teachers, tutors. The things that we were just talking about are already there and will only get better. So she's 1 year old. When she's 7 years old, when she's 15 years old, those things are only going to be better. But who's going to be there for those 8 hours a day, guiding her to regulate her emotions? Who's going to be teaching her emotional regulation? Who's going to teach her soft skills of like negotiation, how to talk to another human, how to just be a good person? What does that look like? Those are the things that I really care about. And I think that that's out there. I know that there are school districts out there that talk about these things. What it makes me think back to is there was a study that was done, I think it was in 2014, of CEOs and universities. I'm sorry, CEOs of companies. And what they were doing is they were asking, when you get someone out of high school or out of college, what is it that you want? But what the results came back were, they didn't want, they were like, yeah, you got to be like intelligent. Yeah, you have to know some things, but we'll teach you what we want you to know. We'll teach you what we want you to know and how we want you to do a thing. But what's more important to us is, can you negotiate with someone? Can you compromise with people? Can you advocate for your point of view? Can you have a human to human conversation? Can you make eye contact with someone, right? How do you work with someone with your soft skilled mastery to be able to move something forward? And that to me is what's really interesting. There was a hiring practice back in the early 2000s where you had these major companies, the IBMs, the Googles, Microsoft, these major companies that would hire people based on pedigree. Top GPA from a top Ivy League school goes to the top company. The criteria was, what's your pedigree? You get a lot of really brilliant people in a room, stand around and look at each other, can't say a word. They don't know how to talk to each other. They're missing. There's some people in there that are definitely brilliant. Can they work in a team? Have they developed a skill set to work in a team? They definitely have something to offer. They don't know how to get that across.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the opportunity that, looking at it optimistically, I feel like the next generation of parents have a very different view of what they expect out of school. And we all know that the parents kind of are like the natural customers of schools. So I do think with what we're already learning in the industry, with the parents kind of demanding and having those expectations, is what's going to drive a lot of the changes that need to happen in a lot of the schools right now. Because I individually, I think we could all agree, like, that principals, teachers, like all the specialists, they all are going in with their best interest. However, the system still is built around outcomes that I would say most parents these days don't care about as much as maybe they did 30 or 40 years ago. It does feel like the sense is they want the schools to help provide like well-rounded human beings. And if that results in, getting them into a good college or anything like that, that's the secondary piece of it. So yeah, it's just such an interesting thing that I think is part of the fabric that's driving a lot of the change.
I think that's the thing that, as a new parent, worries me the most um, is hearing how stressed, anxious students are nowadays to succeed. They're hearing the pressure of what success looks like, and I got to have the right grades, and I got to go to the right school, and I got to get the right job, and what that leads to, where I really, for my daughter, want her to be happy. I don't want her to be stressed about the standardized test, and I didn't do good enough on the testing, and I didn't do good enough here. And that's not the things. I want her to be happy. I would value that. I want her to have discipline. I want her to have, competitive spirit, and I want her to try hard. I don't think that being happy negates trying and work ethic. But those are my biggest concerns, is that I see a system that is creating a lot of anxiety in children, and that worries me as a parent.
Yeah.
And not intentionally, like you said, not intentionally. There are amazing people in education that have their heart in it for the right reasons, and we need more of those people. They are not showing up every day saying, how can I stress the hell out of my campus today? That is not the intention at all.
Yeah, no, and it's an important discussion. Last question before we wrap up, though, is for people that are just joining our industry or just getting started in their career, what advice, experiences, guidance would you give to somebody who's just getting into this?
I would challenge anyone that's thinking of getting into this to try, or to any career endeavor, would be to answer why. Are you interested in getting into this, and finding your why, and making sure that it's something that you're passionate about? I think that, in some fields, if you want recognition, if you want money, if those are the things that drive you, there's a place for that. I feel like if you're going to get involved in education, I think it's really important that you get involved because you're passionate about education, and you're passionate about making an impact in playing some role, some piece of the puzzle, whatever that is. But making sure that that's something that you feel strongly about. And if you have work ethic and if you try hard, you'll do great things. The byproduct of that can be the things like recognition and financial gains, but those are the byproducts. And if that's your sole purpose, then I would say, don't do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, for the listeners, if you are not already a subscriber, wherever you're listening, hit the subscribe button. And betterlearningpodcast.com is our hub for everything. So if you would like to be a guest, have suggestions, topics that you want to talk about, go to betterlearningpodcast.com. And Aaron, I really appreciate your time. It was great hearing your perspective on there and having conversations at a different way. We talk all the time, but being able to set time out and be able to talk more at a higher level about our industry and what's going on. Really appreciate it.
It's great. Thanks for having me, Phil.
The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.